this is part 4 of our batch review. We're going to talk about module 4.2, the Human Male Reproductive System, particularly the hormonal control. Now, this is actually very short because you already know that the most important thing about the hormonal control in the male reproductive system will be threefold. You need to take note of the hypothalamus, you need to take note of the anterior pituitary gland, and also take note of the gonads or the testes. And the same thing actually when we talk about the female hormonal control. So what is the most important thing that you have to take note of? This is called the hypothalamic pituitary gland or axis, because it will be taking note of the hypothalamus, the anterior pituitary gland, and also the gonads as well. So what is actually happening here is that the hypothalamus will be producing a very important enzyme, hormone that will be affecting the anterior pituitary gland. So what would be that hormone? Well, the hypothalamus will release the gonadotrophin releasing hormone or GnRH, this one as you can see here, which will then affect the anterior pituitary. So the hypothalamus would produce the GnRH to affect the anterior pituitary gland. And what happens here? The anterior pituitary gland will release then two more hormones, which is the luteinizing hormone and the follicle stimulating hormone. Now, the luteinizing hormone will have a specific job here because it will be affecting, of course, the testes. But what particular part of the testes? It will be affecting the interstitial cells. That's why it's going to be producing testosterone. Remember that the interstitial cells are actually the Leydig cells. So this is the word that I'm looking for a while ago. Interstitial cells are the Leydig cells, and they will be the ones producing what we call as the testosterone. So that's the job of the luteinizing hormone. The follicle stimulating hormone will then stimulate the sustentacular cells, coming from the word sustain. These are the Sertoli cells that will be nourishing, sustaining the production of the sperm cells. Particularly, the sustentacular cells will be also producing another hormone called the androgen binding protein, which will be enhancing spermatogenesis by enhancing the ability of the cells to bind to testosterone, which stimulates spermatogenesis. So let's go over it all over again. The hypothalamus releases GnRH, gonadotrophin releasing hormone. The GnRH affects the anterior pituitary gland, which stimulates this to produce two more hormones, the luteinizing hormone and also the follicle stimulating hormone. On one side, the luteinizing hormone will affect the gonads, the testes, particularly the Sertoli cell, the Leydig cells, which would be the interstitial cells, so that more testosterone will be produced. On the other hand, the follicle stimulating hormone, FSH, will then affect the sustentacular cells, which would be the Sertoli cells, so that it will produce more androgen binding protein, so that there will be enhancement of binding of the testosterone by the cells to produce more sperm cells. So take note of this one. If the interstitial cells will not work, no testosterone will be produced, which means no enhancement of spermatogenesis, so spermatogenesis will decline. If the androgen binding protein is malfunctional, then even if there's a lot of testosterone, then there will be no spermatogenesis will happen because it will not be enhancing, or it will not be allowing spermatogenesis without the presence of testosterone. If luteinizing hormone is malfunctional, it will not be able to affect the Leydig cells, so there's no testosterone, then there's no spermatogenesis. If there is no follicle stimulating hormones, then there will be no sustentacular cells, no Sertoli cells, no androgen binding protein, no binding of the testosterone, and therefore no spermatogenesis. So you will see here that there is indeed a lot of things that will happen if parts of that would be malfunctional. So please don't forget that there's another hormone that is very important, and this is where the negative feedback will come in. So the inhibin will be released at the same time, proportional to the sperm count. So when the sperm count increases because of increased testosterone, there's also the increase of inhibin. Eventually, a threshold will be reached, so that too much inhibin will now start to prevent or have a negative effect on the anterior pituitary gland. So it will stop FSH, it will stop LH production. And of course, you know the reason why inhibin will inhibit, have a negative feedback effect on the anterior pituitary gland, because if there's too much sperm cells produced, there is no need for FSH and there is no need for LH to be produced, because it will continuously produce a lot more sperm cells when there is actually too much sperm cells already. So to prevent the use of too much resources in the body, the inhibin will inhibit the production of FSH and LH to stop the production of spermatogenesis. Alright? And also take note that testosterone also has a negative effect on the anterior pituitary gland, thereby preventing FSH and LH. And testosterone also prevents hypothalamus to produce GnRH, which also eventually prevents FSH and LH to be produced. So that's the whole thing about the male hormonal control. It's actually very short, but you already know what's so important about here. So don't forget that. Let's go to the next video.